It's a whole lot of camera. Tech reviewers talk about cameras a lot in smartphone reviews. Photography and video are primary ways that people tell stories. I think we might fixate on this topic a little too heavy for mainstream phones, but sometimes a phone comes around that genuinely tries to live up to that idea. And I think we miss some real gems when we don't take those phones seriously. I was going to try and make this a combo video for both the X70 Pro and the Pro Plus, but there's honestly too much going on and too many differences. I'll have to follow up the Pro in a separate video. This is the most camera on a phone I've ever been tasked with reviewing. It's ambitious, it performs well in simple point and shoot use, but there's so much room to grow here with all the features and settings. This is easily the steepest learning curve on a phone I've seen yet, but most of this camera app is genuinely worth taking the time to learn. And just when I think I've gotten it all, or I feel like I've hit a limit, there's another mode or option that takes the phone a small step farther. I don't love the out-of-the-box auto AI HDR modes, but that's okay. There are 5 different permutations of auto mode. If you don't like one flavor between HDR, Zeiss color, and AI toggles, you should be able to find the mode that does suit your tastes. It might take a little time to find it, but it's in there. That's before we get into specific portrait, low light, and manual pro modes with 2 different flavors of raw capture. That means for one of my test setups to see what the phone is really capable of, I'm shooting a minimum of 8 photos on one of the 4 lenses on the back of the phone. We're talking about video, auto modes, gimbal stabilization, manual controls, log footage, resolution and frame rate controls, bit rate options. It's overwhelming on first impression, but after familiarizing, it makes every other phone feel a little incomplete once you get used to it. And to review outlets that try and boil all of this down to a simplified number score and who only test full auto for average consumers, you're rigging your reviews to help the most popular phones win, especially for the regions where this phone will sell directly. This is gonna be a hefty chunk of change, so the phrase average consumer need never leave your face. No one is accidentally dropping the equivalent of $1,000 US on this and then saying, better only shoot full auto and never dig into any of the settings. That person doesn't exist. The consumers interested in phones like these are already light years ahead of tech reviewers. But I digress. There are definitely a few sticky spots here. Slow motion video is weak at the fastest frame rates. Some of the HDR settings get unicorn pukey in unpredictable ways. Image stabilization options are a bit confusing between the main sensor and the gimbal. The app layout is busy. There are some distracting elements on screen when you're trying to focus on your composition. And I just find this overall build a little terrifying to use with the curved glass. And the case included, leaving the sides mostly exposed and unprotected. I really do roll around in the dirt to get some of my shots, and the installed plastic screen protector is already failing for how hard I've been going on this phone. But then you start shooting and you keep shooting, and it starts to feel more like a camera and a little less like a social media content machine to get you more likes and shares. And that feels really nice. Where there are some sticky bits in the software, the brute force approach to this hardware overcomes a lot of those sticky bits. This main camera sensor is an absolute monster. The GN1's larger surface area and pixel binning capabilities deliver fantastic dynamic range. But this also helps close the gap on autofocus performance, where I find this phone outperforms the non-SL sensors on Samsung Ultra phones. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. It took a quick minute of Googling to break down all of these sensors, so here they are. The GN1, that's the big dog for the main sensor. That's backed up by a Sony quad binning sensor for the ultra wide, which also includes the gimbal image stabilizing hardware. Then on the zoom side, we have a separate Sony sensor for a 2x zoom, and this is a 50mm equivalent field of view, which is the default on this phone for when you start using the portrait mode. Then we have a tiny 8-megapixel OmniVision for the super zoom telephoto, and on the front we have that terrific 32-megapixel Samsung selfie shooter. 3 different companies supplying all of the sensors on this phone. Just all around a formidable collection of cameras and lenses. Shooting samples for this review took so long, but of course, reviewing any camera is more involved than just counting all the numerous megapixels and then taking 3 poorly composed shots in auto HDR. We gotta dig a lot deeper than that. Buckle up, folks. I've got a metric poop ton of ground to cover. I'm gonna try and move pretty quick, but this is gonna be a long one. And getting into this app, there's just so much to cover, and I'm not gonna be able to hit on everything. If you remember what it was like to pick up a standalone point-and-shoot camera back in the day, there'd be these super basic menus and a half-hearted attempt at giving you some aperture, ISO, and shutter speed controls. And then you'd go and pick up a DSLR, and it was just brain-boggling how many menus and settings and adjustments you could make. The X70 Pro Plus feels a little like that. Out of the box, you get a strip of photography modes, and then another menu hiding even more fun modes, and then settings for each mode under that. Like, I didn't even get to the long exposure setting, which is pretty decent, even when you're hand holding the phone at night. It's fun. A handful of these feel like novelty one-offs. Fire up Super Moon. You get kind of a laugh out of that. But if you're really trying to capture a moment, or you're trying to plan a shot, an auto moon mode is gonna look kind of fake. And that's not really something you'll want to preserve years from now. Lots of fads for stickers and portraits and night modes. Those fads burn out pretty fast over time. The app is busy, but I appreciate some of the attempts at trying to help the user focus. The hint of a target for the gyro indicator is easy to look through. It still gives you a sense if you're wiggling the phone too much. Or in the Pro mode, where you can toggle a clean viewfinder after you've dialed in the settings you need. But the clumsy bits can interfere, like having focus peaking for video but not for stills that I can find. With this shallow a lens, I could really use focus peaking for stills. The aforementioned issues with face detection and autofocus while shooting a vlog, or the heavy-handed noise reduction for audio, or just the huge swath of dead space while shooting video where we can't focus because all the UI needs to be on the viewfinder. It kind of forces you to left justify a lot of your content. There are a handful of stumbles, and those stumbles detract from the overall experience, but I still need to balance them against how absolutely ambitious the whole camera is. Because what I can't fault Vivo for, their biggest claims about performance absolutely hold true. This camera app is fluid and feature-packed. It's quick and responsive making adjustments. We don't suffer the late capture of a OnePlus or the shutter lag of a Samsung. Image processing is some of the fastest I've ever seen, even when chewing up hefty HDR and portrait mode options. Night modes are shockingly fast, and the Pro Plus can produce brighter, super raw images than many phones can finish off JPEGs. And for a Snapdragon 888 Plus at the end of 2021, it's so well-mannered, holding out for longer video clips than many other phones in this tier. I'm not sure there are practical ways to do this much with a phone camera and make it all magically easier to use. With so much hardware to manage, unfortunately, we don't see complete support for third-party apps like Filmic. 4K 30 from the main sensor, and that's about it. The app currently locks up when switching modes and cameras, so I hope a Filmic update can fix that. Where this Vivo stumbles can be irritating, but what it gets right is stunning, especially if you have any kind of eye for content creation. But I've been rambling on long enough, my voice is starting to fail. We really should wrap this up. Where's all of this leave us with the cameras on the X70 Pro Plus? There's a clear focus on a kind of consumer here And I dig that. Where I still think my old LGs were easier to use getting vloggy videos shot. On the spectrum of phones out there, this X70 feels like it lands in between a Sony, as the most traditional camera-like phone, and a Samsung, which has more of a social media creator vibe. Vivo's solution is robust, taking great advantage of a significant hardware perk: this main camera sensor. I really want this idea to land properly. On this Vivo, we're looking at a sensor size that is roughly 0.5 millimeter narrower than a 16mm film frame. Quick tangent. I have a couple hours of my grandfather's old 8mm home movies, and it's shocking to see my grandparents younger than I currently am, but with kids older than Lex. I hope to preserve memories for my daughter in the same way, but digitally instead of on film. It's something our phones are already good at. The immediacy of having a decent camera with you at all times. But moving up to a 16mm style frame is interesting. Now we're splitting the difference between classic home movies and full-frame 35mm, where 16mm still exists today as a hipstery solution for low-budget filmmaking, especially when a filmmaker wants to easily move a camera and they don't want to shoot digital. 16mm to the rescue. Well, allow me to introduce you to the starter cinema camera of the 21st century. It might already be in your pocket. A fully feature-complete, internet-connected device with a main sensor climbing well past point-and-shoot style cameras, and it even makes phone calls. I think students of all ages should start with something like a phone. Just like I shot in 16mm in high school for an art project, and my grandfather shot in 8mm when he was young. What you learn about controlling light and working through the technical limitations of that one tool will inform an appreciation for when you move up to a nicer camera. And plus, even factoring in the premium price of a phone like this, you're still coming in a lot cheaper to get started. Okay, so that wasn't a quick tangent. But back to the X70, I think it's a missed opportunity that Vivo doesn't have a case that can mount other optics or lens filters. This phone is dying for a good ND filter, but there's just so much raw capability. If sometimes a bit coarsely realized, there's a charm that helps some of those software concerns, especially for the smart techies who understand a phone is always a work in progress and is not the conclusion from an embargo week review. There's an easy overrepresented conversation being held about average people just taking some snapshot point and shoot photos. The community of people interested in pushing these devices harder is a smaller community of people. Their interests will not be as well represented by popularity algorithms. And that's why I push so hard on this stuff, because it's so much fun when a gadget has more to offer and encourages you to play with creating things. The X70 Pro Plus can take you really far down that inspiration or creativity path. It's up to you how far you want to go. I'll of course leave some links down below where to find more info on the X70 line of phones from Vivo. As always, thanks so much for watching, sharing, subscribing. Huge thank you to all the folks who do check the links down below. Maybe you're shopping a little merch. You could check out my photography book on Amazon. That really does help keep production rolling on this channel. Full list of all my affiliates and partnerships on SomeGadgetGuy.com, or you might consider, just maybe, joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This is a list of the coolest tech pals on the planet, and they get full access to the longer and the broader camera and audio deep dive reviews that I publish. They're super cool people, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next review.